John Gerardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of the Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Gerardi.
Thank you all so much for joining Right to Life Radio. All right, this week on the show, with Jonathan Keller here with me as my trusty sidekick, as always, we're going to talk about something that's kind of a little squeamish. This has to do with the whole question of using fetal tissue from aborted children for medical research, for perverse, evil medical research, perversely and evilly using the body parts of aborted children for medical research. So if you have younger or sensitive ears around, you may want to, we're not going to do anything FCC violative here, but
just morally violative.
Just highly morally violative, discussing it. And so just
you're forewarned.
Just be forewarned. Be forewarned. Just giving you the forewarning. If you want to listen to it later, there's always the podcast, which you can find on Apple Podcasts or the Stitcher podcast app. Just look for Right to Life Radio. You can watch the YouTube video of it, youtube.com/righttolifeca. All right. So with that being said, Jonathan.
Yes.
Let's get into this topic. And it has to do with your taxpayer dollars here in California and with UC San Francisco. UC San Francisco.
The University of California. San Francisco.
Yes, the University of California, San Francisco. So this is your taxpayer dollars, at least partially at work here. UC San Francisco has this thing called the Bixby Center for Reproductive Health. I believe that's the full name, the Bixby Center. And this is basically the locus of all abortion evil in the United States, I'd say. Not to be hyperbolic. It's a little hyperbolic.
In the sense that how do you think? It is
they do abortions.
The boot camp.
It's
the
ground
academy.
Zero. Yeah, this is where they do abortions. They do late-term abortions. They train people how to do late-term abortions. They do research on abortion there in order to promote horrible pro-choice policies. Their director, Daniel Grossman, is one of the leading pro-choice sort of medical academic zealots and advocates in the country, who has testified before the California state legislature gazillions of times. He's a bad dude, and I'm sure has tons of influence with the Biden administration. He is a bad egg. He is a bad egg every which way you slice it. UCSF hosts this evil with your taxpayer dollars. It's the locus of, I'd say, it's sort of ground zero for the pro-choice movement in California, certainly, and perhaps in many ways for the whole country. It is a horrible, evil stuff that they do at the Bixby Center. And I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that's being promoted by UCSF experimenting on the body parts of aborted children. Now, this was an issue in the Trump administration. During the Trump administration, through President Trump's orders, not the National Institutes of Health, not NIH. It was NIH, wasn't it? Yeah.
I think so.
The National Institutes of Health.
Our friend Dr. Francis
led
Collins.
by Dr. Francis Collins, Anthony Fauci's boss, both of whom I would love to load into a cannon and fire into the sun, as I've said on a number of occasions. So one of the things we have to understand, and this is probably helpful for understanding even broader news cycles about Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins. What Francis Collins does at the National Institutes of Health and what Anthony Fauci does at the NIAID is the name of it, which is looking at mostly infectious and autoimmune diseases. Their jobs are to give approvals for research grants to look at various kinds of healthcare issues. NIAID focuses, as its name suggests, on infectious diseases and autoimmune diseases. Fauci has been in this role since 1984 and was sort of the face of the federal government's AIDS response, and was actually despised by many people in the LGBT community during the AIDS response because, shocker, he was not very enthusiastic about treatments for AIDS and was hyper-focused on a vaccine for AIDS. Anyway, that sounds familiar. Not to get into non-right to life territory, just thought I'd mention that. Interesting.
The more things change.
The more plus ça change. So, Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins, what they do is okay research grants. That's what they do. That's their job. Okay? And thus, they have a huge amount of weight on the direction in which research goes. As an example, again, not taking positions on COVID-related issues that are beyond the scope of right to life. One of the things to note about, for example, hydroxychloroquine, this is just an interesting example, by the way. I'm not saying anything one way or another. All of the positive research on hydroxychloroquine that indicates that it would be useful for fighting coronavirus came from outside of North America, or most of it. Most of the positive research came from outside of North America. Most of the research from North America, which was under Dr. Fauci's control, he was the one okaying, ultimately, with responsibility for the oversight for giving those grants, those were more negative. And I think it goes to show the kinds of incentives that researchers have. They want to tailor their research towards things that NIH wants to fund. They want to tailor their research towards things that the National Institutes of Health want to fund. So the viewpoints of the heads of the National Institutes of Health and NIH are really important, especially when it comes to ethics issues in research. The chief pro-life failing of the Trump administration, the biggest own goal, the biggest mistake, and Jonathan, we were saying it earlier than anybody else. We were saying it in January of 2017.
I will say, this is, John, lest you toot your own horn and people just think that's what it is. I remember people that I respect, Christian leaders,
right,
that were talking about the fact, isn't this great?
Well, Francis Collins,
he's in a Bible study with a couple of these different individuals, and look at these good signs, and it's encouraging to have people of faith that are in the Trump administration, and also people saying things along the lines of, look, it's great that President Trump isn't just cleaning house and indiscriminately firing everybody that was a holdover from the last administration. There's some continuity. There's some steady hands at the wheel.
Right. And that position was one where you did not want continuity because Francis Collins was appointed by Barack Obama, who got rid of the prior guy. Francis Collins was appointed by Barack Obama. Why? Chiefly, this was like line number 2 in the news stories about appointing Francis Collins, was because Francis Collins was an enthusiastic supporter of embryo-destructive stem cell research. And who is in charge of giving the federal research grants for embryo-destructive stem cell research? The National Institutes of Health. So when Barack Obama completely flipped George W. Bush's policies on funding embryo-destructive stem cell research, who was the hatchet man who made that happen? Who was the guy who enacted those policies to pour millions and millions of wasteful government dollars into a dead-end form of research that all it does is kill embryos and doesn't actually cure any diseases? That was Francis Collins who was picked for that. And frankly, the great pro-life failure of the Trump administration was A, keeping Francis Collins in that job, and B, never changing the Obama administration policies for funding embryo-destructive stem cell research. That's why I actually have some qualms when people say, President Trump's the most pro-life president of our lifetime. Okay, look, President Trump did a lot of great pro-life things. I'm not going to deny it. He did a lot of great pro-life things. He did all of the good pro-life executive actions that President George W. Bush did. He did some things beyond what President George W. Bush did, specifically with Title X funding, eliminating that. I give him kudos for that. He did more than George W. Bush did. But in this area, it was a huge flop. He completely kept in place millions and millions of dollars flowing to embryo-destructive stem cell research, and millions of dollars were still flowing, thanks to Francis Collins being there, to research using fetal tissue. Okay, so let's give the distinctions here. Embryonic stem cell research is from an embryo, the first cells of the human organism. Fetal tissue is an aborted child who's 6 weeks old, 10 weeks old, past conception. This is a child with a distinguishably human body, arms, legs, fingers, toes, brain, liver, genitalia even, which we're going to talk about in this article. Very, very disgustingly and horrifically. So the Trump administration, I think bunglingly, because they clearly did not know or did not care that Francis Collins was okaying all of this horrible, immoral research on the body parts of aborted children, on fetal tissue research, in addition to embryo-destructive stem cell research. because they either didn't know or didn't care. It was like midway through the Trump administration, David Daleiden sounded the alarm saying, we're funding at UCSF fetal tissue research where we're trying to graft human scalps, a fetus's scalp, onto the back of a lab rat.
Which, John, I just have to interject something because I want to be cautious because we do want to say thank you to President Trump for the good things that he did. But
yeah, and again, I'm not denying any of the good things.
But as we record this, some people know we sometimes record the show a little bit early. So on Wednesday, the 14th of July, as we record this, I checked on Twitter this morning, and David Daleiden was tweeting, today, July 14th, is the 6-year anniversary of his first expose, that groundbreaking expose that went all around the world and impacted the presidential race. The reason I say this is
they had advanced knowledge.
The entirety of the Trump administration occurred after these exposés were released.
Exactly. And I think it was a thing of either between Trump himself or people in Trump's administration either didn't know or didn't care.
Or in the case of Dr. Collins, did know, did care.
Yeah, and actively pursued it. So it was like midway through the Trump administration, we cut off federal funding for fetal tissue research, much of which was being done at UCSF over Dr. Collins's objections, I will note. Over Dr. Collins's objections. Then, as soon as the Biden administration comes into play, of course, Biden keeps in place Obama appointee Francis Collins and Obama appointee Anthony Fauci. He keeps them in place. And what do we see? We immediately restart again with fetal tissue research. Now, perhaps even worse than ever. So this is the write-up on it from liveaction.org, which is Lila Rose's website. Pro-Life San Francisco, they report, has long been protesting UCSF and related institutions which operate under the university's banner for their gruesome experiments involving fetal tissue and body parts, including recent experiments involving humanized mice, as well as the egregiously inhumane second trimester abortions which supply those fetal parts. UCSF receives millions of taxpayer dollars, probably California and federal, to conduct these experiments. Well, some of the millions are federal grants. And then there's just the normal state funding that any UC receives. UCSF receives millions of taxpayer dollars to conduct these experiments, which hardly resemble any legitimately purpose-driven science. Fetal body parts are being harvested under the UCSF umbrella from babies aborted at the 2 UCSF-affiliated Women's Option Center locations. Studies show that the labor induction abortion techniques used in these facilities to procure fresh parts can result in live births as often as 50% of the time. UCSF professor and director of one Women's Options Center location, Eleanor Dre, has referenced the reality of abortion survivors in both DND and labor induction abortion procedures. So in part, these are children who are being born alive and then killed as part of the abortion procedure, aka legal murder in the United States. Pro-Life San Francisco recently made a request under the California Public Records Act that included requests for any and all UCSF protocols and procedures for determining the viability of a neonate after labor induction abortion procedures, including in instances where the neonate is born alive after the procedure is performed. UCSF's protocols and procedures regarding the delivery of medical care to neonates born at the Women's Option Center. Human fetal tissue procurement logs. Those were the 3 things they wanted. These were in addition to several other requests which have yet to be fulfilled. The documents obtained pursuant to this request revealed disturbing details about the true extent of the atrocities taking place at this state-sponsored institution and the strikingly callous and casual attitude with which they are being carried out, all at the expense of average Americans. So we'll dig more into this. We need to go to a break here, but we'll dig more into this. What we're pointing out is that at UCSF, you have children being aborted in gruesome late-term abortions. You have some children surviving the abortions and then being left to die. And you have gruesome federally funded experiments using human fetal tissue in ways that are shocking and horrific. We'll dig into all of it after the break. This is Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 AM 1400 and the iHeartRadio app. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This is The Lights on Broadway. Barry Gibb was so cool. All right, thank you all so much. Is so cool. He's still alive. I think all the other. Yeah, seriously. I think I just killed Barry Gibb. Thank you all so much for listening to Right to Life Radio. As always, a production of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. All right, folks, we're talking about something that's a little gruesome. It's about fetal tissue experiments being done at UC San Francisco.
This is your standard happy Saturday morning listening fare.
I mean, it is a show about abortion policy, so it's always, we've always had a, Jonathan, I gotta say, for a show done by a pro-life organization that talks about abortion policy, we managed to be pretty upbeat. Like, I gotta say, it's yes. Kind of a bizarre posture we're in, but I think we do a pretty good job of it.
Yes, I think that is true.
Yeah, I think otherwise we would go completely insane.
It's difficult, I will say, having been in this this pro-life movement for I think now technically I guess next year it will be basically I'll break the division, because I started when I was 20. I'm 38, so I'm going to be like right around full-time working. I guess it'll be almost half of my adult life. Half of my life. All of my adult life, basically. But I will say it can be a little discouraging. So you have to find gallows humor and some joviality here and there.
Well, yeah, I think if you're just constantly, you have to have some ability to talk about it and be passionate about it and care about it without going completely nuts. So at any rate, we're talking about what's happening at UC San Francisco. UC San Francisco has this center, the Bixby Center for Reproductive Health or Reproductive Research or something like that, the Bixby Center. And UCSF has two abortion clinics that are sort of connected to it, where they train people how to do abortions and where they are collecting fetal tissue for research. So our friends from Pro-Life San Francisco have been protesting this for a while. And one of the things that Pro-Life San Francisco did was they got records of basically what kinds of fetal tissue were being collected. And basically they were able to do it through sort of the California version of the FOIA law, the Freedom of Information Act. This is the California Public Records Act. So they were able to get, this is, a state-funded hospital, state-funded medical provider, able to get some of this stuff. So they got some logs about the kinds of tissue that is being collected at UCSF. So they said, Pro-Life San Francisco, this is from the story about it from Live Action, which is Lila Rose's site. Pro-Life San Francisco provided Live Action News with the tissue procurement logs they obtained, which are referred to as, quote, arrival/departure and collection lists, presumably referring to the arrival and departure of the procurers themselves, whose entry and exit times are logged, in addition to the actual parts harvested. It appears from the dates that the fetal tissue harvesting business didn't miss a beat, while other businesses were completely shuttered during strict COVID-19 lockdowns in California. That is true. Abortion providers were always deemed by the state of California throughout COVID as an essential service. So abortion providers never shut down during COVID. Even when other healthcare procedures that were deemed elective procedures were all delayed, this was not. So they have these logs. They got 43 logs through this basically records request. Pro-Life San Francisco did. And what they notice is a disproportionate number of the fetal tissue that is being procured is human genitalia, which is bizarre, horrifying, but this gives you some idea of, these are second trimester abortions, guys. These are babies that in some cases might even be viable, or at least close to viability. I mean, when you look at UCSF and their guidelines for when they do abortions, they will do abortions as late as 20 weeks, and then in specific circumstances, this is in accordance with California law, they will examine the possibility of doing abortions later than that. Okay, and once you get into 21, 22 weeks, that starts to become viable. So of the 43 logs that they got, 42 document the harvesting of genitalia and or gonads. The live action story writes, it seems ironic that these scientists who work for an institution that postures itself as a frontline warrior in the battle for so-called reproductive justice spend their days mutilating the reproductive organs of people whose lives have been brutally ended under the banner of reproductive choice. But perhaps the most chilling aspects of these logs is the presence of mundane, everyday conversational tidbits scattered within them. Things like shift trades and laptop mishaps are casually discussed in between the horrific list of body parts taken from aborted children, many of whom may have been born alive and or able to survive on their own. Here's one of the emails from June of 2020. It says, thank you. Also, I wanted to let you know I received your other email about the new collector. Will that collector be coming in instead of you, or will you trade off? Here's another email.
Collect.
Collect. Yeah.
Collector.
Yeah.
As in person who will, if you've watched, we talked about in the last segment, David Leiden's blockbuster videos that were released 6 years ago this week. Collector means the person who, as described in those videos, as shown in those videos, takes their gloved fingers and sifts through a tray of baby body parts to look for things
the
to
organs
collect.
they want. Yeah, the stuff they want to collect.
That's the collector.
That's the collector. Here's an email saying, today I collected a testis and a bladder, a penis and a bladder, a clitoris, a bladder, and a uterus. Left at some time that's blanked out. Thanks. Here's another email. I apologize for the delay and lack of reply. I forgot my laptop at home yesterday. If I don't reply via email or you need a question answered sooner rather than later, please feel free to text me on my cell. Sometimes even the procurers even display a bit of jolly camaraderie. Welcome back. Thanks and have a good weekend. Nothing from so-and-so. Collected bladder, kidney, and internal/external genitalia from blank. Thanks and have a good weekend. Happy Thanksgiving. Internal genitalia and kidneys. Happy Thanksgiving. This is evil.
Yep.
Guys, it's just flat out evil. There's just no other way to describe it. It's just, this is evil. And this is happening at UC San Francisco. This is happening with your taxpayer dollars funding it. It is happening with your federal taxpayer dollars funding research on human fetal tissue. It's happening with your state taxpayer dollars funding this stuff. It's just evil. It's completely monstrous. And there's just not much more to say about it. Please do, you can read this story from our Facebook page, Right to Life of Central California, also our Twitter account, but the live action story is just heartbreaking. It's just absolutely heartbreaking to see what is happening and infuriating. All right, we'll have more on Right to Life Radio right after this. The Jackson 5 here on Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much. Little Michael Jackson was so great. Anyway.
He was.
He sure was. All right. We're going to talk about the Hyde Amendment right now on this segment of the show. The House of Representatives, especially in the Appropriations Committee, is basically trying to push an appropriations bill, which I believe they will try to push through with the reconciliation procedure, if I'm not mistaken there, Jonathan. So
yes,
yeah.
And just to clarify, folks, for those of you who do not follow the internal machinations of all the crazy stuff that's happening in D.C., they basically they're trying to get a bipartisan bill for infrastructure,
right?
And it looks like you're going to have Republicans that will agree to that, so that it will not be filibustered.
Right.
But then when it comes to this crazy process called reconciliation, they can only do that with budget procedures,
right?
And they can pass that on literally a strict 50-vote majority, and then Kamala Harris would break the tie.
Right. So that's what the reconciliation process is. Basically, for most things in the Senate, it's subject to a filibustering. Basically, when the minority, as long as they have 41 members, they can basically say, we're not going to allow this piece of legislation to advance. The theory is in the Senate, you can talk about something forever, and you can only stop debate when you have 60 votes in the Senate. So effectively, if you have 41 votes, you can talk a bill to death. You can prevent a bill from becoming law by saying we are filibustering this. So you need only 41 senators to do that. Obviously, the Republicans have 50 senators, so they can filibuster most things in the Senate. There are some things, though, that you can't filibuster. Generally, you don't filibuster judicial appointments. You don't filibuster appointments to the president's cabinet and the president's administration. And you don't filibuster stuff that's through the reconciliation process. Now, the reconciliation process is usually tied to the federal budget. Okay, I guess the idea is that the federal budget is too important. We can't have it held up by constant partisan bickering. So stuff that's attached to the budget in some way, you can pass with a simple majority in the Senate. You don't need 60 votes. You just need 50 votes plus the vice president breaking the tie. So now the stuff, though, so basically what both parties have been trying to do, they've been experimenting in this age of greater and greater partisanship, is how much stuff can you stuff into a reconciliation bill that you can claim is sort of budget adjacent or budget connected to accomplish all of the policy goals you have without being subject to the 60-vote rule in the Senate. And the Democrats are trying to stuff as much abortion stuff into this reconciliation bill, this appropriations bill, as they possibly can. Now, here's a press release from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops about some of the abortion stuff that's being packed into this appropriations bill. This week, the House Committee on Appropriations will mark up the Labor, Health, and Human Services, Education, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill, which currently excludes the 46-year-old Hyde Amendment and other longstanding bipartisan provisions, including the Weldon Amendment. So the Hyde Amendment is the longstanding rider that gets attached to the federal government. We've talked about it a gazillion times. It basically says that no federal dollars can directly pay for abortion through federal health care programs, chiefly Medicaid. Okay. The Hyde Amendment has resulted in millions of abortions probably not happening. It prevents hundreds of millions of dollars from flowing to Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers to actually do abortions. Okay. All the federal money Planned Parenthood gets, the overwhelming majority of it is not for abortion. It's for their non-abortion services. Obviously, that still helps Planned Parenthood's abortion mission, because if you get millions of federal dollars for one thing, it frees up your resources to do other stuff. But this would just give Planned Parenthood tons more money for their single biggest revenue-generating service. The Weldon Amendment is another thing. Now, the Weldon Amendment is sort of toothless, but basically what it says is that states may not discriminate against health insurance providers, health insurance plans for a failure to provide abortion. California has done that for years, and it was not enforced until like literally the last months of the Trump administration. So great job, President Trump, for... Again, along with the stuff we talked about in the first segment about not cutting off federal funding for embryo-destructive stem cell research, were some of the big failures of the Trump administration, whether from lack of understanding of the issue or lack of motivation to do something about the issue. Anyway, So the Hyde Amendment and the Weldon Amendment are going to be axed in this upcoming appropriations bill. Eliminating these provisions would force taxpayers to pay for elective abortions and force healthcare providers and professionals to perform and refer for abortion against their deeply held beliefs, as well as force employers and insurers to cover and pay for abortion. Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee for Religious Liberty, and Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City and Kansas, chairman of the USCCB's Committee on Pro-Life Activities, issued the following statement. This is the most extreme pro-abortion appropriations bill that we have seen, effectively mandating healthcare professionals to participate in abortion and forcing American citizens to pay for abortion with their tax dollars. By eliminating the Hyde Amendment and other Hyde-like policies, the financial fruits of Americans' labor would advance the destruction of the smallest, most vulnerable humans. Eliminating the Weldon Amendment would be an egregious violation of conscience rights by forcing individuals and entities to perform, pay for, or otherwise participate in an abortion against their beliefs. Abortion is not healthcare nor a human service to anyone. Rather, abortion is inhumane. It is a painful death to an innocent baby and often leaves women physically harmed and emotionally devastated. We implore the House Committee on Appropriations to reverse course on these bills that currently expand taxpayer funding of abortion and to restore the long-standing bipartisan Hyde provisions and Weldon Amendment that have saved millions of lives and protected conscience rights. These bills include many other provisions and funding for critically needed services that we support. Americans' tax dollars should be used for the common good and welfare of all, not to finance abortion or force Americans to violate deeply held beliefs. Further, we ask all Catholics and people of goodwill to contact their legislators and make their voices heard. The lives of millions of vulnerable children and the well-being of their mothers depend on our advocacy.
So John, with that note, I just want to point out something.
Right.
Catholic Church, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, not exactly a Randian small government
right-wing libertarian. No.
These are people that I just say this not as a criticism, but they're not saying everybody should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. All this
social welfare spending, it's all bad.
It's pork. You should just get a leather strap and bite down and deal with your pain yourself.
That's not in my constitution.
No. I mean. And I know, talking with some of our conservative friends, sometimes they have quibbles with the Catholic bishops about, is this really necessary spending? But on this issue, they are basically saying, look, we get that there are people that are suffering. There's a place for government spending, maybe even extravagant or wasteful government spending in some cases, we would say, or I would say. I don't want to take a position for Right to Life Central California.
Yeah.
But this is like the lowest possible bar. Like, could we at least maybe not forcibly extract money and give it to abortion providers?
Right, and that's precisely what's going to happen here. I want to bring the story around locally. I want to give this a little bit of a local flavor. I want to bring it around to Jim Costa. Now, Jim Costa is a member of the House of Representatives from here in Fresno. He is pro-choice. He has in the past, though, voted and supported the Hyde Amendment. And what I want to ask is what his position is right now.
Yep.
I'm having our supporters from Right to Life of Central California call his office and ask that he oppose the Hyde Amendment and ask him what his viewpoint is going to be on Hyde Amendment funding. Because I think this is really, really bad. I think for him to give himself this posture as a kind of blue dog Democrat, as historically that's how he's sort of positioned himself, as a kind of moderate Democrat, not an extreme Nancy Pelosiite, but something more in the middle. If he's going to vote for abortion funding, if he's going to vote for federal funding for abortion and not stick his neck out, then I think we need to question that. I think we need to question just how moderate this guy is. So I'm just making a note of that because I think it's becoming more and more difficult to be a kind of Jim Costa Democrat in today's Democrat Party because, look, Joe Biden had to completely flip-flop his position on the Hyde Amendment in 2019. Okay, for 43 years, from 1976 to 2019, Joe Biden supported the Hyde Amendment. He supported the Hyde Amendment for decades as a senator. He was elected to the Senate in 76. So from January 1977 all the way through January 2009, Joe Biden supported the Hyde Amendment. He supported the Hyde Amendment for 8 years as vice president. He continued to not change his position for the 4 years when he wasn't in office. Until over the course of 1 week in 2019. In 1 week in 2019, Joe Biden was first asked about the Hyde Amendment, clearly didn't understand what he was being asked, and said, yeah, we definitely got to get rid of the Hyde Amendment. You're right. And people said, whoa, did Joe Biden just change his position on the Hyde Amendment? And then Biden had his flunkies come out and say, no. President Biden has not changed his view on the Hyde Amendment. In fact, he continues to support the Hyde Amendment. It's rooted in his deep Catholic faith. Literally the next day, after I'm sure 24 hours of nonstop harassment by pro-choice advocacy groups, Joe Biden realized the political impossibility of getting the Democrat nomination if he maintained that position, and so flip-flopped.
Well, crap.
In 24 hours,
yep,
Joe Biden, purely because of raw political pressure, casting aside his alleged religious convictions.
John, he's a very devout.
He's a very devout Catholic, as we've been reminded, and he expressed that week in 2019. I think it was June of 2019. He said he supported the Hyde Amendment because of his deep Catholic faith. And within 24 hours of issuing that statement, apparently his deep Catholic convictions changed, and he then changed his position to support it. And I think Biden is just typical of a lot of Democrats who supported the Hyde Amendment, but now the Democrat Party's platform position on the Hyde Amendment changed in 2016. Hillary Clinton was the first Democrat presidential candidate to oppose the Hyde Amendment. And now now we're just reaping the fruits of it. This is exactly what happens when, I wish we could say this is a surprise, but they're doing exactly what we thought they would do. They're doing exactly what we thought they would do. And I think our only saving grace might be the Senate, and it might be Joe Manchin, frankly. When we return, we'll talk a little bit more about Joe Manchin and the obscene promotion of abortion funding that we're seeing from the Democrats in Congress. That is next on Right to Life Radio, right here on Power Talk 96.7 AM 1400. Jose Feliciano with the superior version of Light My Fire. It's one of those covers that I think is better. You don't like the Doors, John?
No, I like them.
No, I'm sorry. I'm hypothetically having someone ask me. You don't like the Doors, Johnny? No, I don't. Don't really care for them. Or at the very least, I like Jose Feliciano a heck of a lot more.
It's much more sultry.
It is. He's just an absurdly good guitarist, and I think he's got a beautiful voice. Right to Life Radio, thank you all so much for listening. Hey, if you think to yourself, this is a really good radio show, I really appreciate the work of Right to Life of Central California, how can I help them? Well,
if only there was some way I could express my appreciation.
Financially. Go to righttolifeca.org or simply rtlcc.org. And there's a button there that says 300 Club. And if you go there, why don't you, instead of giving Amazon Prime or Netflix or Disney Plus or the Hulu or insert your Paramount Plus, whatever.
John, I'm gonna throw you a bone.
Okay.
Instead of going and seeing Black Widow in the theater.
Oh my gosh.
Just
instead of that. Okay. Oh yeah. Instead of seeing Black Widow in the theater, give to Right to Life of Central California our 300 Club. So it's $25 a month for a year. That makes $300. Hence the name 300 Club. Or you could do one donation for $300. However you want to do it is awesome. I want to thank the people who have newly joined the 300 Club, and the 300 Club helps us to sort of pay the normal bills. It's a really useful for us, and it's a great way if you don't have a gazillion dollars to give away to charities. This is a simple way for you to contribute in a way that really tangibly helps us. So I want to thank our recent July 2021 subscribers to the 300 Club: Liam Gray, Joe and Florence Carrara, Carol Wright, the Bathtub Medic, which I guess is a business, so thank you to the Bathtub Medic.
Wow.
William and Carol Gong. So thank you all so much. It's just lovely. The Bathtub Medic. I think that's a plumber. It's a plumber. The Bathtub Medic. So if you guys need your bathtub medicked, then call the Bathtub Medic rather than the plumbers who sort of fleeced me lately. All right. So Jonathan, as we wrap up the show,
yes,
I think it's good to sort of give the broader philosophical thing that's behind this massive Democrat push for abortion funding, which we're seeing in Congress. The Democrats are trying to stuff all kinds of abortion funding to directly fund abortion through federal health care programs by eliminating the Hyde Amendment in the new big appropriations bill that they're trying to push. I think our saving grace might wind up being Joe Manchin.
Yep.
Because Joe Manchin from West Virginia still supports the Hyde Amendment and is much more afraid of Republican voters in West Virginia, even though he's a Democrat, of Republican voters in West Virginia than he is of Chuck Schumer. It's so funny seeing these news stories about Chuck Schumer should bring some pressure to bear on Joe Manchin, as if they seemingly not understanding, do you know how many Republican voters there are in West Virginia that Joe Manchin has to appease rather than Chuck Schumer? I mean, Trump won West Virginia,
30 points, 39 points.
It was like 70 to 70 something to 20 something. Trump won West Virginia. So don't kid yourselves, folks. Joe Manchin does not give one flying what Chuck Schumer thinks about him. Anyway, so hopefully Joe Manchin can really be our saving grace in preserving the Hyde Amendment. He was not a saving grace in preserving Hyde language in one of the recent COVID relief bills, but maybe in this appropriations bill he can. Let's hope. Certainly we will push for the House. We are trying to do our part to influence Jim Costa from Fresno about it. But let's understand the underlying philosophical idea. There's a philosophical idea underlying this push for the Hyde Amendment, which is the Democrats used to be about safe, legal, and rare abortion. That was their motto. Abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. That was the classic Bill Clinton formulation. And they have moved away from that. They don't believe in abortion being rare anymore. They think that abortion should be safe, legal, and universally accessible. And that word accessibility is the key that's driving all of modern day Democrat abortion policy. It's accessibility. Anything that is a hindrance to someone being able to get an abortion, whether it's ethical objections by a doctor who does not want to do abortions, whether it's a lack of money, so we'll have the taxpayer pay for it, lack of access, lack of ability to drive to an abortion clinic, so let's ship you abortion pills in the mail. Whatever it is, we knock down any wall to access. That is the forceful position of the Democratic Party. And that is what we are contending with here, is basically, they are doing everything in their power to fund abortion, to make abortion more common. Well, Dean Martin's going to play us out. Thank you all so much for listening to Right to Life Radio. We will see you next week on Power Talk.